Kia ora, and welcome to the Marlborough Book Festival podcast, the place where you can hear writers talk about their work, their lives, and the inspiration behind their writing. I'm Sonia, the chair of the committee. This year's festival was a fantastic weekend, and we are eager to share the recordings with you very soon. In the meantime, enjoy this engaging session from the 2023 Book Festival.
Hi everyone, I'm Margie from Dog Point Vineyard, and we welcome you here for this session with Robbie Burton and Nikki Macdonald. And I know we're going to have a fabulous listen and sit back and enjoy. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Marg, and thanks again to Dog Point for sponsoring this session and to all the sponsors who really make this festival work. And welcome and thank you to all you for coming out this afternoon to what's going to be, as Marg says, I'm sure a great session. Now, growing up as a voracious reader, Robbie Burton encountered few books that reflected the place that he lived. So for the past 3 decades, he's been doing his best to change that. Leading the development of one of New Zealand's great independent publishing companies, Potton & Burton, he's produced, I think, an extraordinary 350 books, is it?
Something
now?
Like that, yeah.
Ranging from coffee table photographic books to histories of tramping to Nikki Hager's explosive truth bombs. He's also an avid outdoorsman, and it's these twin facets of his life that he's brought together in this, I think it's actually his second book that bears his name. The first was a tramping guide 30 years ago. But what we're going to be talking about today is this brilliant autobiography, memoir of his life, which is called Bushline. And I think we're actually just going to start with a wee reading.
Sure. Mine was an accidental genesis. There's nothing unusual about this, but it's perhaps not so common to have had a mother who would, eyes twinkling, regularly delight in reminding me of the fact. She always knew I would laugh, though she had little idea of my quiet pride that our bond was sufficiently strong for her to take this liberty with her fifth born. When we moved into our new 3-bedroom family home in 1960, it was already full with my parents and my 4 older siblings. The only room available for me and my little brother, both unexpectedly conceived and born while the house was still being planned and built, was what had been intended as my mother's sewing room. It was tiny, separated from the master bedroom by double glass doors with windows facing out to the west. It was just enough room to squeeze in 2 single beds, mine pushed into the corner of the 2 large picture windows. The house had been built on a scrape of hard hillside clay above the straggle of shops at Tahunanui, Nelson's beachside suburb. They had a panoramic view across the beach and Tasman Bay to the north and out above the suburban sprawl west and south through the Moutere Hills and the mountains beyond. What this meant was that from my bed, without even lifting my head off the pillow, I could see the long silhouette of the western ranges that fringe Kahurangi National Park, running all the way from the Mount Owen Massif in the south, across the Arthur Range to the hills of Abel Tasman National Park in the north. Whenever there was enough natural light in the mornings, and while my brother slept, I could poke my head under the curtain to read or watch the sun slowly light up the mountains. And too, in the evenings, I would often lie on my bed at this quiet end of the house, away from the hubbub of the kitchen, and watch the sun setting behind these western ranges. On those days when the mountains darkened into a deep indigo and the sky and clouds above were washed in improbable tints of yellow and orange, it never failed to stir in me a deep, abiding longing. This sweep of summits not only filled the physical horizon of my childhood, but also became indelibly etched onto a memory horizon that has remained buried in the ancient part of my brain. I can always visualise the rise and fall of the ridgelines, feel the pull of these distant peaks and name them off. Mount Owen, the Devil's Thumb dipping to the Wankapeka Valley, Mount Patriarch, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Twins, Wharepapa, Mount Arthur with Winter Peak in front, Flora Saddle, Lodestone, the seemingly volcanic profile of Crusader, Mount Campbell, Hoary Head, Takaka Hill, and finally the hills above Abel Tasman slowly fading into the sea at Abel Head.
Beautiful. So, after 3 decades in publishing obviously books by other people.
Yeah.
What prompted you to finally, decide to write your own?
Well, it was. It had a very precise genesis, actually. This. My father died when I was 3, sadly. Though I had an extremely happy childhood, it needs to quickly be said. But about 7 or 8 years ago, I was rifling through a box of some of his papers that I had actually rescued from the family home, and was feeling, I have to say, rather sad about how little I knew about my father. As a young person, you don't ask those questions, and my mother's gone now. So, and I have 2 sons, and I remember clearly thinking, I do not want this to be the scenario for my children. I want them to actually know who their old man was, what had shaped me, who actually, where I had come from. And so I thought, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to write a manuscript for them, and then I'm going to put it in the top drawer. And I quite sincerely set off to do that. And so I set about doing that, and I hadn't really told anyone, but I was casually mentioning it to a friend of mine who's an author, and he just looked at me and said, "Oh, for God's sake, you're a publisher. Turn it into a book," and just with a sort of scathing look. And so I did, but I did it as a privately published little book called Family Land, which was the personal account, and I did a huge print run. 75 copies, and which I actually at my 60th birthday party, and almost none of my friends knew I'd done this. I sprung it on them as my sort of gift back to them. It was hilarious and a really enjoyable kind of thing to have done. And I thought, well, that's great. I've done this, and so my kids have now got some sort of story about their old man. But the book started spreading, and I started getting feedback. People I didn't know, strangers, were ringing me up or sending me emails and things, and it was really encouraging. And I thought, actually, maybe there is something more to do with this. And one of the bits of stick that I got from people who read it is the first book had nothing to do with my working life as a publisher, which I thought, really, who's going to be interested remotely in that? I didn't see how. I mean, if you're in the middle of it, it's stressful and difficult and quite hard to sort of feel that that's sort of really interesting. So, but I realised that I actually needed to try and weave together both a personal history and also a working life now, which has been 30-something years of actually publishing books. And so I set 2, actually. And it took about, what am I now, another sort of 3.5, 4 years. I used a lot of material from the first book, but I also wrote a lot more. And so that was where it all began. Yeah.
And you've done a great job of weaving those 2 sort of facets together. And I guess some of, obviously that love of the outdoors, the reading that you beautifully read, that extraordinary vista from your childhood home, that started quite early on. And you say that you didn't feel so much the loss of your father, but you weren't a terribly happy kid at school, were you? I think you said you, as a long-haired kind of soon-to-be greeny kid at Macho Nelson College, you were the wrong boy at the wrong time. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I did actually have a fantastic peak in my education in Standard 4. Which was, that was actually, I loved primary school. But unfortunately, I went to Nelson College, and interestingly, I interviewed Nick Bollinger this morning about his book about the counterculture, and I had older brothers and sisters and was hugely influenced by that. And Nelson College in the early 70s was a place where I wasn't allowed to grow my hair, and I got whipped on my first week for not wearing a cap, and by a 7th former. I mean, it seems extraordinary now, but I still remember the happy feet that were painted on the floor of the prefect's study. We had to stand while he got flogged. It was, it seems incredible, but I was the wrong boy, and I was unfortunately completely in opposition to the actual teaching. And it seems trivial now that something like the length of my hair should have such an impact on how I regarded the school. But of course it was a symbol for something else. It was a symbol for, your otherness and what you were actually believing in. And so I wasn't a very confident kid. Actually, I didn't really have the guts to stand up to the school system in many ways. So I sort of hid, really, and disengaged, and frankly was not interested. I educated myself just by reading and reading and reading. But I regret actually that my secondary school education, later on my tertiary education, wasn't so flash, to put it mildly. I look now at my two children, my two sons who've just gone through high school in Nelson, and just marvel at the fantastic education they've had, and it is just the polar opposite of what I experienced, and the sort of mature adult relationship they have with children. They're not the teaching staff are not preoccupied by the length of their hair or what they wore. It was terrific. I've been astounded. But for me, no. As I say, I regret the fact that I haven't had a better education. If I hadn't been so busy, I would have gone and got one. But it's too late now.
You seem to have done all right with that one. You did find your tribe, though, I think, through skiing at the Mount Robert club field. Yeah. So I think you said from the age of about 13. At 13, your uncle took you on a ski week, and then from the age of about 14, you went up the mountain every single week with total strangers.
Totally, yeah. And it's just, it was the thriving club field in the 70s, and there was still snow, and usually lots of it. And it was this fantastic system where you could book in, and then there was a carpool, and some often stranger would pick you up from the top of the drive at sort of 6 o'clock in the dark on a Saturday morning and take you up the mountain. And of course, I just completely fell in love with the whole experience. And it was a mixture between tramping and skiing, actually. You had to walk for an hour and a half, and you get up and stay in these two huts, 60 people up in the mountain. And I was just bitten, completely, absolutely obsessed, as teenagers can get with things like that. I just loved it. And it became the great burning passion, actually, of my teenage years. It went on, of course, to develop into tramping and mountaineering, but the skiing was the start of it. Yeah.
You were the fifth of 6 children, I think, right? And you said that the Burton family had one set of ski equipment, and you were expected to deal with that, whether it fitted or not. What sort of state was it by the time you came around?
So my Uncle Gordon, who was a huge influence and took an interest in the family. In fact, the cover of this book shows me with his pack, hold it up, his pack and his boots. Everyone thinks I've got huge feet, and his ice caps, which was taken at the age of 6 in the camping ground at Aoreki, Mount Cook. My Uncle Gordon shouted every one of our family as a ski week, and which he did. But my mother had no money, and so there was one pair of skis which were completely knackered, and this blue pair of sort of ski pants, and the knees hung down to here, and a pair of boots that you just had to jam yourself in. And that first year was fairly dodgy, but I realised actually after that I was going to have to fund it myself.
Yeah, which you did partly through a teenage job that you had. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, the first real job where I made some serious coin is I got a job for the summer in the Sea Lord Fish Factory, which was in those days totally Dickensian. It was something out of the 19th century. It stunk for a start, just the most appalling smell. And my job was to crawl along. One of my jobs, was to crawl along the gutter where they had the fish filleters were on either side, and all their scraps fell into this fish. And because I was a skinny little 15-year-old, I had to crawl along and get all the rotten fish out of the thing as I went. So I completely reeked. And my mother made me, when I got home every night, take all my clothes off out in the garage, and before she'd let me into the house, and I'd go and have a shower shower, trying to get all the stench off me, and then the next day walk out to the garage and climb back into these clothes and cycle down to Sea Lords. But I ended up with a whole lot of coin at the end of it, and it was the greatest thrill of my teenage life to finally get my first set of brand new ski gear ordered from Oscar Coburger in Cranmer Square in Christchurch, and out of a catalogue when it arrived on the Newman's bus. How things have changed. And I clipped into them in the living room where I could see the range of mountains and pretended I was actually going to, for days. And my mother used to walk past and shake her head.
And you never ate fish fingers again?
And I never ate fish fingers again. Oh, I lie, actually. I started feeding them to my children, and I once tried one once. Yeah.
So, I mean, what was it about the skiing that had you so hooked? Was it the adrenaline? Was it the sport itself? Was it being in the mountains? Can you pinpoint?
I actually think it was the whole package. Yeah. I mean, skiing I found enormously thrilling, but if I'm honest, I think there's something clicked in me in that environment. I mean, I was just hook, line and sinker about the mountain world. And the camaraderie of it, I think, that the whole idea of it takes a village to raise someone, and I encountered there a group of really sympathetic adults. I didn't have a father, but these people were, I was welcomed in, and it was an extraordinary environment, actually, when I think about it now. All volunteer run, not sort of commercial. And I think if I look back now, I think as much as anything, the skiing was terrific. I mean, I used to look with great sympathy at people who had to run around a muddy paddock on Saturdays chasing a bull while I was high up in the mountains, enjoying that sort of world. It was incredibly exotic, and skiing obsessed me for some years. But
it did, because you went on to become a ski bum, and for a season in Queenstown, and then you became an instructor and was kind of going.
So I spent a lot of time up Mount Robbie. I once worked it out. I think I spent about a year and a half of my life up there. I used to go back and teach every year for a week every year and live up there. It was the best of times, to be honest. But eventually, I wore that one out. Actually, I just got sick of it. But it was a terrific passion to have as a youngster. Yeah.
I guess an extension of that became the tramping and mountaineering. Yeah. And I think some of that came through your elder brother, Pete. And, of course, he was friends with Craig Potton. So can you talk about, who obviously had a huge impact on, the latter trajectory of your life. Can you explain, I guess, how you met Craig and I suppose what might have happened if you hadn't? Did you ever think about that?
Well, I'd be working in a bank. You need bankers. I don't know. It was huge. My brother Pete, who's 7 years older than me, he took me under his wing, really. We were very close and still are. And his best friend was Craig Potton, who was subsequently become a very well-known landscape photographer. And the two of them were really generous and took me, introduced me to mountaineering, started taking me on trips down to Mount Cook, and we subsequently did some big, long mountain trips together. And actually, it was a friendship that was really significant for me. I mean, it's quite a thing when you're 17, 18, 19 to have two older people actually do that to you. They felt much more mature, and I loved it. It was not only did we do interesting things, but they were interesting people and doing interesting things, and at university, and it was a very, very profound kind of effect on my life. And actually, as it turned out, the whole shape of my life really has been determined by that friendship. Yeah. One
of the big trips that you did together with Pete and Craig and Paul Roy, I think, was in January 1980. You set off on a 3-month traverse of the Southern Alps, and I just loved some of the descriptions. I guess, I mean, tramping and mountaineering are hard enough, but when you remember what the equipment was like in those days. So you said you had an Alp sports parka that leaked after a few minutes of rain, mountaineering boots that after getting wet didn't dry out properly for 3 months. And of course it was before the time of kind of, lovely packaged freeze-dried meals. So I think you actually organised sort of food dumps. I mean, what was that experience like?
It was life-changing, actually. I mean, we weren't gun trampers or gun climbers. I mean, I think that's important to say. We were just your normal everyday kind of tramping types. But we had a big idea, and there'd been one, as far as we knew at the time, there'd been one winter traverse done by Graham Dingle and Jill Tremaine in the 70s, and he wrote a book about that, which I read and thought, and I popped the idea, even though I was the youngster, and I managed to persuade Craig that it was a good idea, and then Pete had no choice but to come, and so which worked really well. And yeah, it was and so we just said, well, we can do this. We've got enough skills to do it. This would be an awesome experience, and it was a huge logistical exercise because we didn't know freeze-dried food, so we managed to get these tins from great big tins from the local health food shop, where I think they'd imported some sort of dried fruit in them, and then pack them all up and solder the tops on, and then get them dumped all the way up the Alps in various places, mostly where the road crosses the Southern Alps, but in various places we either carried them and got a helicopter in, and then set off, from just by Milford Sound and headed north home. But it was a fantastic experience. The achievement was really satisfying, but mostly for me it was about just spending so much time in the wilderness and actually slowing down and becoming really comfortable in that place and just feeling really relaxed and still is the word I think I best knew. I think I had to say in the book, I got to Mount Robert, to the car park at Mount Robert after 3 months. I genuinely would have turned around and gone back if I could have. I just loved the kind of ease, which frankly, you just can't get unless you spend time. It was. It's a cliched thing to say, but when you actually achieve a dream as I was 21, it really shaped me actually in terms of what I thought was actually possible. So it was a fantastic experience.
Because I think you say you had a deep-seated aspiration of finding something more of myself in the natural world, and this seemed like a perfect way of doing it. I mean, what did you find, just a sense of yourself in that environment?
Well, I think I had completely deluded ideas that I would sort of come out of it with white light coming out my ears and, some degree of enlightenment or something. No, I didn't really have any great revelations, I suppose, but I did learn that was the place I wanted to be, and which really fed me, I suppose. And I think, as I just said, just actually doing something a bit more ambitious was a wonderful, because I wasn't particularly ambitious or at that age at all. I'm a long, slow developer, I think I'm best to describe me. And so that was great, sort of step on the way. Yeah.
I mean, you make it sound like it was all pretty, easy going, but there was some pretty hairy moments. Can you
There were
talk about that?
plenty of hairy moments. I mean, there always are.
What stands out?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had the worst summer of weather, I think, in decades. And so we spent a lot of time just cowering under rocks or in tents, and then when we get some fine weather, sort of literally running to kind of make up. But I think we had some really bad weather in parts, certainly north of Mount Cook. We got caught in Murchison Hut for a week by a storm, and then we wondered whether we were going to have to give up, and we decided to go. We didn't have nearly enough food to reach our next food dump. In those days, in 1980, there was still food left in huts. The Forest Service was still around. People just left food. There weren't nearly as many people in the backcountry. And we survived off scrounged food, basically. Whatever we could find, we would just dive on and to do that. So, we had plenty of bad weather, which actually was really challenging and forcing us off our route. There was plenty of challenges, I suppose, in doing that. Interestingly, for me as a 21-year-old, it was hunger was the hardest one of all. I starved for the whole time, and I found that easily the hardest thing to deal with.
Did you get past that? Did you kind of learn to... No, okay.
No. There's a famous story I really like to tell. We got quite a way north, and we were only a day or two's walk from Arthur's Pass, and we'd been forced off the divide by bad weather. We had to go down past a musterer's hut, the top hut of one of the stations in the Rakaia, and there was this sugar bag of potatoes. I mean, I'm not kidding. It was like this high, huge big thing, and it had a note, "Help yourself." So someone had packed that in for the musterers, and so we thought, bonza. So we all took, 2 big potatoes each, walked about 4 hours up to Park Morpeth Hut. boiled them up that night, thought this is cool, and then we were only a day from Martha's Pass, and of course the weather came in. The next day it was pouring with rain. And I saw Paul sitting there in front of the fire, and he said, "Oh, bugger it, I'm going to go and get those potatoes." So he walked for 8 hours and came back with the whole sack. And then we just lay around boiling potatoes. We had nothing else until I was just lying back. Oh, God. And the kind of animal instincts are kind of frightening, really. So no food was the real, The others were still smoking tobacco, and I think that was a mistake. I should have smoked tobacco because I think that actually...
because it does have an appetite
It really does help,
kind of,
I suffered. Well, either because I was younger and more immature or not smoking, I think. But I really suffered with food. I really feel for people who have had to starve. It's an interesting challenge if you ever try it,
My name's Anna Smale. I'm a novelist and I've published 2 books, most recently Bird Life, but I've been talking about The Chimes, my debut novel today. The festival is amazing. I feel like it's the best kept secret of literary festivals in New Zealand. Just the warmth and generosity of the hospitality. I feel like as authors, we've been looked after so superbly, and it's just so collegial. You get just time to be with other writers, which is absolutely brilliant. It's more intimate than many other festivals. It feels like you actually have direct access and you're part of a sort of a friendly crowd, sort of in a book group or something. It just, there's a sort of an immediacy here, and I think just the generosity of the sponsorship as well. It feels warm and it feels like a family gathering.
I mean, objectively, tramping and mountaineering probably even more so, it's a bit ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, putting a crazy heavy pack on your back to slog it out through the rain and snow to get somewhere that you don't need to go. I think, in the book you say that people often ask, why intentionally put yourself through so much suffering? Have you come up with a credible answer? Yeah,
I have. Very credible. You're about to hear it. I think... I've thought about this a lot. I think actually with mountaineering, it's pretty simple. You're putting yourself in dangerous situations. I think that if you come back alive, the intensity of facing that makes you feel more alive than any other experience I've ever had. So that's absolutely worth it. But generally for tramping, I think that I've sort of read around the subject, and there's a theory basically that the intensity of experiences in your life is what actually marks out the things that give it shape and that give it meaning. And I would argue that there are many ways to do this, but for me, tramping and mountaineering is a very intense experience because you suffer. Inevitably you do. It's not easy and often not fun. But that experience just leaves its residue, I think, and its resonance, which actually gives a whole lot of shape to what you do. So when people look at that it's madness, I think you forget actually what the intensity of that experience does. And that's how I find it, and that's what I absolutely love about it. I'm not a natural. I'm not actually very strong, naturally, to my enormous frustration. I don't have great natural stamina. It's always hard won. So I often suffer actually a lot. I still do, and especially as I'm starting, to get old. But I'll still do it because those experiences, those weeks in the wilderness where I do something hard. I did something really hard last year. That just sticks with me way more than a week at the office. I can guarantee that. It endures. Which I really like. So I actually think that's the thing for me. As well, of course, there's the natural beauty and the environments I'm in. But I think there's something to be said for that. And people have many ways of doing this, but it's one that suits me.
I think when you said growing up that you wondered, you kind of looked at the rugby boys and they were building resilience of a kind on the rugby field, and that, and that maybe that was just your alternative path that you were kind of...
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think I found another way. It was because I was an aspiring long hair. Rugby at that time didn't appeal to me at all. But the mountains offered another way to, I mean, if you like, to actually deal with issues like courage and grit and such like. And you know, I became very aware of that actually, and you know, that was great for my sense of who I was. Yeah. Mm.
So once you'd finished, you know, being a ski bum and doing a Southern Traverse, you did actually have to find a job. And so you went to work with Craig at the Native Forest Action Council, where you were basically trying to save the trees.
You were, yeah.
And that actually was where you published your very first book, I think, wasn't it? Should we do the little
Yeah,
reading?
I do. So the Native Forest Action Council, colloquially known as NFAC, was one of the probably the most prominent organisation in the late 70s and early 80s, and the most successful actually in saving native forest in New Zealand. Subsequently, that role's been taken on by other organisations, especially Forest and Bird. But in those days, they weren't really into it, and they were, in fact, was a group of very committed people and some very talented people, of which I should stress I was not one. But some of the huge victories, the stopping of the beach scheme on the west coast, Okarito, Waikukapa, Poriora, and Whirinaki in Paparoa National Park were all saved because of NFAC campaigns. I got a job there. It was my first job, really, which was working for far less than the dole. So it was a sort of, we were existing on donations. But I went and said, could I get a job? And they said, well, can you type? We need someone as an administrator. And no, I can't. So I said, I'll go and learn. So I went home for a month and put a tea towel over my hands and learned how to touch type, and then went back and worked there for some years. Just basically as an administrator. I wasn't confident enough to be any good at the kind of full-on campaigning. My colleague Craig was very good at that, and anyway, so I'm going to read you a little bit there. I remained very much a foot soldier, though I did become more useful, doing some writing and organising along with my admin work. One of the tasks was to take on the production of the Paparoa's Guide. It had been written by Andy Dennis, who had ditched his academic life as a brilliant scholar of old Icelandic lore to become a dedicated conservationist writer and roaming tramper. He'd taken on the job of researching and writing a proposed 60-page booklet to promote the recreational possibilities of Paparoa, the spectacular country behind Punakaiki on the west coast. Few walkers and trampers knew the area at the time, and raising public awareness was part of a large campaign to get its rich lowland forest out of the hands of would-be loggers. Andy, who was not known for his restraint when it came to words written or spoken, had produced enough material for a much larger publication. And so I set to learning how to publish a book. Fortuitously, there was a venerable printing firm in town, R.W. Stiles, whose friendly, generous proprietor was so wonderfully unconcerned by commercial realities that he always had time to run me through the next step in getting a book ready for printing. This was long before computer design, so I learned the cumbersome process of paste-up, which now seems positively archaic, but involved getting the text typeset at the printer, who then printed it out into long rolls called galleys. I'd then manually cut up and paste lines and paragraphs of text onto page-sized boards to match our chosen design, and these were then photographed by the printer, who dropped in the photographs and produced film to make the printing plates. It was slow and meticulous work, and learning as I went, I built up the book page by page. Apart from the fact that in the first printing, Stiles managed to reverse all of the photos in the colour section so that they very carefully captioned the image was back to front, which is not the best look in a guidebook. We were all very happy with what we'd produced. Looking at it now, its crude design gives it all the hallmarks of a self-published book. But we didn't see that then. It had also been a great joy to get to know Andy, whose love of language made a deep impression. His early death from pancreatic cancer in 2016 was an especially sad loss. My timing at NFAC coincided with some major forest conservation victories, which I've just all told you about. But I didn't know it then. I was a bit player in a conservation campaign of international significance, one which led to a complete turnaround in attitudes towards logging native forests, and that saw virtually all remaining native forests eventually included into the conservation estate. I learned firsthand that if you alter the terms of the political debate and can tip public perception, then dedication and skill can actually generate long-lasting change.
Yeah, so you must feel, pretty proud to have been part of that.
Yeah, though I am very as you can tell, eager not to overblow my importance, because I was not born to it at that stage. Yeah.
So that was your first book. I mean, did you enjoy the process? Did you ever imagine that there might be a future?
Yeah, I loved it actually. I did. I really took to it. I really liked it. It exposed the fact that I was just naturally interested in design, for example, and I loved words and stuff. And actually, I carried on doing all kinds of side hustles, continuing with Paste Up and doing bits and pieces for all kinds of things in different environments. So it was sort of there, but I never considered for a moment that I would become a publisher. That wasn't, definitely not on the horizon. That wasn't a possibility really that I saw. Yeah.
No, and so it was some years later that Craig was setting up this kind of fledgling publishing company and approached you, and I think you said you not only did you not know, well, maybe perhaps not completely nothing about publishing, but very little. You didn't even have a computer. You had to enter a business association award in order to get a computer. So what was the publishing world like in those days? I
had no idea, because we knew nothing about the publishing world. So Craig had set up. He became a landscape photographer. Well, actually, what he'd started doing was getting contracts with the Lead and Nansen Survey to write and photograph guides for national parks. And that led to one thing or another. He got into photography and then got sick of having his work murdered and set up his fledgling, what was then Craig Potton Publishing. And he quickly realised that he didn't want to drive a desk. And so he liked working with friends, and he knew that I by then got a reputation that I could actually organise stuff. So he approached me, which is how I got involved. So it was pure nepotism. But there was really only, to start with, a couple of part-timers and me, and no computer. And I saw an ad in the paper that the local Chamber of Commerce ran a business awards, and the first prize was an IBM computer. So I went along to a workshop on how to write a business plan, and wrote the business plan, and subsequently we won the award, which was fantastic. And then chairperson of the Chamber of Commerce was furious, because she knew we were old greenies. Of course, we used to be in opposition to the Chamber of Commerce, so that wasn't a very good look. But anyway, that was how we started. And so it was really just Craig. It was very much not part-time, and me and a couple of part-timers, and we went from there. But completely DIY, and I do not recommend it. I think it's easy to kind of lionise the DIY approach, and it's easy to fall into, we just taught ourselves and it was terrific. It's a really cumbersome way to do it, but we got there in the end, slowly.
3 decades, 30 years, extraordinary technological change. I mean, how has publishing transformed in that time?
Utterly, totally. On the bad side is that people don't buy nearly as many books as they used to. That's a continuing struggle for us, which is why coming to these festivals is so heartwarming for me, to be honest. It's just fantastic that people are still interested. So, but print runs have gone like this steadily for
I think
30,
you had a
30.
stat in the book, the one of the sort of early read photographic books. I think you said sold 170,000?
Yep. The first New Zealand colour
numbers.
pictorial book of colour photos sold 170-something thousand copies. I remember talking to someone from Reeds and saying when they would look at any kind of New Zealand book, anything in the 60s, they would just print 5,000 copies, bang, like that. Well, no New Zealand publisher's doing that with every book, I can assure you. But what saved us has been the huge technological change. And I started talking about doing manual paste up, when I'm literally sticking things down on a piece of paper. Now, I wouldn't be in business if it weren't for technological change. Now we're doing all of that on our desktops, on a Mac at work. Everything's being actually laid up. It's incredibly rewarding and easy way to actually make books, and because you can juggle text and photographs just straight away. All the photographs are coming in digitally. So for the first 20 years of my life, I was looking at transparencies, getting them scanned, and people were mailing us trannies, and we were getting them scanned. And possibly one of the biggest ones is all photographs in a photographic book in the old days, where the transparency would come, you'd send us off to a pre-press house in Wellington, they'd scan them, and then this proof would come back to see whether the colour was okay. Well, each one of those proofs cost about $30 each one. So if I was doing a big colour book, And then if it wasn't any good, you'd have to say, pull up the reds, take down the blacks, whatever, send it back. They'd make another set of film, and it would come back. And we would spend on a big colour book $20,000 or $30,000 just on the pre-press before it went to the printer in China. And then we'd have to get a huge big box of film and then send that off to China, and they'd make the book. It was a really expensive process. Now I've got a printer at work which is footprinted to the press in China. I can produce all the colour proofs for a book for maybe $150 as opposed to $30,000, and I can build all the books and do all of that. I mean, it's just been transformational. And I remember, in terms of the democratisation of culture, it's been huge. It turns in the hands of everybody now. I mean, there's downsides to that, which is that everyone does it, and authors can't make a living, which is not great. But the upside is that our power to make books, which no one else has got any advantage over us. We're all using exactly the same technology. It's nothing to do with that now. So the gatekeepers that used to exist don't. One of the sad things, actually, though, is that camera gear has got so good now, and that all the photographers I knew who could make a living from selling stock photography have all gone out of business. So, Gavin cannot make a living selling photos because everyone's taking them. And that's been really bad, actually. I feel very sad because there are lots of very talented photographers. That said, there is no shortage of amazing visual sort of imagery around. But yeah, it's so different to how it was.
One of the most difficult decisions as a publisher must be deciding what's going to sell. What have been your biggest surprises? But the things that should have worked that didn't, and the minnows that turned into massive sellers. Yeah,
it's a hard one. That in terms of the story I tell of the book that did the worst I've ever done was a book of a guy that came to me who'd published photographs about golf courses of New Zealand. Which had the appalling name of Fairway to Heaven, sorry. Which I reluctantly said yes to. And I did some research, which I don't usually do, to be honest, and I can still remember the stats. There's something like 265,000 people in New Zealand belong to a golf club, and there's another 500,000 who play it regularly. And I thought, well, this is a dead cert, I'm going to sell it. It was a complete and total dog, and I have no idea why. I couldn't tell you to this day. It just,
you don't think that the title might have been effective?
Well, I don't want to disparage golfers, but I didn't think that would put them off in terms of how. But But in terms of what works, it's often really surprising what actually sort of endures. But I'm not really in the very commercial end of publishing. There's been a few of Nikki Hager's books, like Dirty Politics, which just exploded. For example, I didn't see that one coming. If you look at what's on our backlist now in terms of what really performs, I'm constantly surprised by the kids' books we do, how well they do, and it just depends on the zeitgeist. We've got a book of Māori Whakatauki that we did 10 years ago, which just sells and sells and sells. But that's because I think we're in a phase of where it's going well. The reality is that you'd never be a publisher unless you were a blind optimist, which is what I am. I think every next thing's going to be terrific. Generally, it's not. Most things just putter along, if I'm honest. But you've got to be optimistic. Otherwise, if you didn't take a risk, you'd never publish anything. In terms of how that goes.
Some have been more risky than others. You mentioned Nikki Hager, and obviously that's been a very important facet of your publishing, but also, I guess, for the public at large, that you have been able to bring these books to a public audience. Can you just talk about how did that even come about?
Just the personal connections. And Nikki and Craig and I were all in the conservation movement together. Right. So he knew us. I think he'd actually taken his first book, which was called Secret Power, about what it turned out to be the early days of the Five Eyes network. And he'd taken it to a conventional publisher who wouldn't touch it and came to us. And because we were small and idealistic, we elected to take the punt, but not without a great degree of trepidation. I was told by a QC that because we were publishing state secrets that we could easily end up in jail. It seemed somewhat implausible to me that would actually happen. So we took a huge punt. But we're a small company. We could organise it, and these books, certainly in the early days of Nikki's books, were all done in top secret, published in top secret, and then just sort of launched out into the world without anyone knowing they were coming. And then we had a strategy for how we were going to avoid a High Court injunction, and we had a whole kind of raft of ways of doing that. So yeah, it's been a really rewarding part of my publishing, but in some ways a bit of an outlier, but fits with our, we've always realised we were never in this publishing business to get rich. If you think you're going to get rich out of publishing, you've got rocks in your head. It's just a very difficult way. But always we're very real about running a business. But we always wanted to do books that we thought counted, and so they really fitted that sort of that idea. So it's been fantastic. I mean, it's now 25, 26, 27 years I've been working with Nikki, and I'm quite public about this. I think he's a national treasure. I mean, the fact that he got a gong this year just astounded me, if I'm honest. I never thought that would ever happen, which is just terrific. Yeah.
I mean, you describe the process as frequently terrifying. I mean, take us inside there. What is going through your head when these things actually come out and you're wondering, is the shit going to hit the fan? Yeah.
It is terrifying. I mean, it's. I find it genuinely terrifying. I'm not someone who enjoys public exposure. I don't find the adrenaline of the process. Actually, some people are, gung ho and think it's extremely exciting. I'm just nervous, and it's extremely difficult to manage. In terms of how it goes. But what's terrifying really is the thought ultimately that we would be taken down as a company. And that always felt to me really sad, that all the work we'd put into building an infrastructure would actually happen. But, it's always a finely judged thing, and the only defence you have if you're publishing confidential material is if it's in the public interest, and that's the defence you've got, and you have to rely on that as being strong enough to do that, to actually be able to go to court on that basis. But we've also mostly relied on the fact of what would the optics look like. So if we've published a book about a subject which is highly controversial, how would it look if the people in power who the book is actually targeting were to take you to court? And mostly that would be a deeply counterproductive thing. So probably our best known book, which is Dirty Politics, which was published about Cameron Slater and the campaign he was running on behalf of the National Party. Was John Key going to take us to court? It seemed very unlikely that he would want to expose himself to all of that and, the legal issues of discovery and such like. We just judged that was extremely unlikely. And so far, we've been all right.
Yeah.
But, so far. I'm not counting the chickens, though, so, yeah.
You also talk about the agony of turning down good books because of the lack of commercial viability. Are there any that spring to mind?
There's too many, and it's too embarrassing. Often when I'm being a smartass, call myself a professional dream crusher because I probably get 10 pitches a week from people with book ideas, and I just, ultimately we have to make a living, so I have to turn all kinds of things down. Yeah, I mean, there's a funny story. I can't remember it's in the book, but in the height of the Lord of the Rings frenzy, I was in New York, and I had a friend who was working for us at the time who had access to a very important publisher at that time. For Barnes & Noble, it was the big book chain. They actually were doing some book publishing, and we went and saw this person. She said, "You know what you should do? You should do a book on all the scenic scenes in Lord of the Rings." And I thought about it, and I walked out, and I said to my colleague, "What a stupid idea!" So actually, wasn't it turned out we wouldn't have ever got the rights, but as it happens. But so no, I'm constantly making mistakes and turning things down. I mean, here's a very current example. I have a good friend of mine who loves mushrooms, and for years he's been hassling me to say, "You need to publish a guide to mushrooms in New Zealand." And I've always said, well, for a start, that would be a pamphlet, and who's going to buy that? So Penguin have just published a book, a beautiful book on fungi of New Zealand. It had sold out before the book had even arrived. So
wow.
Who's done it? I feel sick every time I look at it.
Now, I am going to open the floor to questions in a moment, and we're going to do a reading video. I just have one last question, really. Again, looking back at what you say is your accidental career, you say you didn't love it every moment, and you possibly don't believe the people that say that they do. But how do you feel about the extraordinary contribution that you've made and the work of the publishing house when you look back on it?
I actually feel really, really good about it. I feel like it's been very hard actually at times. Running a marginal business is no fun, and I've had to make some terrible decisions. But I just feel an enormous sense of privilege actually to be involved with the written word and to have been able to do what I've been able to do and to have built up an organisation that gives me the power to actually do that. So it's interesting actually in the last few years, I've had which I never really thought, a really strong sense of vocation. Just as I'm getting old, that's what I feel. But that's a great privilege, really. And so I'm very thrilled, actually, really rewarded to have to have done that. And I think the other thing I talk about in the book, because it's very important to me, is I've made the most wonderful friends through this process. Authors tend to be passionate people who are doing it. No one's doing it for money, and there are the difficult ones amongst them, but I've made some of the most rewarding friendships of my life are actually started out as professional relationships. And I find that community of people I have around me now, whom I call friends and who I see a lot of and have lots of common interests, has really enriched my life. So I'm really grateful for. Yeah.
Brilliant. Now, do you want to do the last reading?
Sure. So I'll read to you from the last chapter in the book.
Which is called A Place to Stand.
It's called A Place to Stand. I'm going to read it from the beginning of it, really. I mean, I think one of the subtexts of this book, one of the things I was trying to do was actually express how strong my sense of place is about living in the South Island of New Zealand and how much I love being here and how grateful I am. So I have a school friend whose trajectory out of New Zealand has always puzzled me. When out walking in the neighbourhood, I regularly pass by his old family home and wonder what has become of him. How does he remember this street of charming old houses and well-tended gardens? He was one of the golden boys in the last years of high school, academically clever, in the first 15, a prefect. Soon after he finished university, he left New Zealand, it seems, for good and has lived in the States for decades. I've no idea why he stayed away or what level of connection is with his homeland, as I haven't talked to him for at least 45 years, and I rarely does a snippet of news filter back. I realise there are many good reasons to leave your home country: the chance to slip a troubling past, the claustrophobic of small-town upbringing, romance, the adventure of fresh opportunities and often ambition. Certainly in my case, a job in publishing based out of Melbourne or London or New York could have offered the possibility of a bigger career. The truth is, though, it never occurred to me that this was a serious option. This reveals a basal truth about my makeup. I have always known with unequivocal certainty that my story lies here in Aotearoa. Any wider ambitions I might have idly harboured have quickly been trumped by the pull of these quiet little islands. That I have such clarity is inextricably tied up with a defining connection to the landscape. It makes any personal question of national identity or character redundant, for my sense of who I am and the culture from which I come is completely shaped by the bedrock of place. The very character of Aotearoa's landforms, the southern light, the incessant flood of changing weather, the distant mountains on so many horizons, the old forests, the rugged broken coastline, the peculiar animals that have evolved here. This is not just about biogeographical uniqueness, but rather who I am. I'm inhabited by this land as much as I inhabit it. As a Pākehā without a marae or an ancestral connection to place, I know that the most significant portal through which I built this attachment to the land has been via tramping and mountaineering. This was my particular path, but I know there are many ways to do this, expressed by sailors and fishers, conservationists, farmers, gardeners, surfers, hunters, and myriad others who find solace and inspiration in the outdoor experience, let alone the droves of New Zealanders who flock regularly to the beach, our great secular church. The nature of this existential pull is ultimately mysterious. For as long as I can remember, the connection has been fueled by fleeting moments of elation and awe, sparked by just the sight, the presence of a particular wild landscape. Unpredictable, unbidden, the qualities of these moments defy easy articulation, yet they are as profound as any other experience, as real to me as the chair I'm sitting on. While they pass quickly, the afterburn lingers, freighting the world around me with meaning. I am something. Somehow, the sense that I am being opened up and offered a glimpse of something much bigger than I am, something of the ungraspable essence of this strange planet. I live for these numinous moments that leave me in no doubt that the opportunity I have to reside in these particular islands remains one of the great privileges of my life.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I am going to open it up to questions now. If you can raise your hand, but please wait for a microphone to come to you so we can record it for the podcast. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. Yeah.
Hey, Robbie. Is there a succession plan for Portland Burton? What does the future look like?
That's it's a tricky one. Actually, if I'm perfectly honest, and I've got to be a bit careful what I say because people's lives revolve around that. But I've just started pulling the pension. I'm officially an old age pensioner now, and that's an interesting question, really. It's a challenge because I think you'd need to be unhinged to want to buy a publishing house in the current climate. So what does one do with one when the time comes? For the time being, I'm really enjoying what I've done. For those of you who don't know, about 4 years ago, I downsized the company. I had 18 staff in a big distribution operation, and it was a complex and difficult business. And I made the hardest decision of my professional life to downsize to now we've just got 4 of us, and we've got a distributor in Auckland who deals with our books, which has made my life way more enjoyable and way more. I mean, I'm only doing 10 or 12 books a year and loving it, and I won't, I can choose what I do. I won't work with dickheads. It means you're not a dickhead, Gavin. So I'm doing what I want, which I really enjoy. So for the time being, I'm making it work, and I'm really happy to plug on. But I suspect the reality is it will probably just peter out eventually. And people go, "Oh, that's sad." Well, is it? I've had a fantastic run. We've done really, we've done a whole lot of stuff that we really like. We're completely the masters of our own destiny. I do exactly what I want. No one, So I don't know. I mean, if someone came along and said, "Well, I want to buy it," well, of course that would be brilliant. I mean, we are steadily becoming probably the biggest. There's a few niches that we're occupying because no one else wants to do it. We publish a lot of natural history, about which I'm passionate. That doesn't sell. It's not economic, but I think it's really important still that stuff is recorded. So I don't. It would be a shame for that to go. So. But yeah, I am afraid, if you look at what's happened in New Zealand, there's hardly been virtually no successful independent publishers that have started in recent times. There's a few, we've got some different models, there's a few exceptions, but mostly they've just gone, and we're left now with the transnationals and the university presses mostly who are making it work. It's a very difficult gig because the print runs are too low, basically. We can't sell enough books, it's as simple as that. Are we going to see a turnaround in that? I doubt it. Yeah.
So the answer to that is Robbie's just never going to leave.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Robbie, you describe yourself as a blind optimist and also as a professional dream crusher.
Dream crusher, yeah.
And I happen to know that you are familiar with writers who talk about something like great mountains I haven't climbed, and you've talked just now about downsizing the business. So this is a kind of philosophical question about what's your experience of choosing not to do something? Like you've been around mountaineering, etc., and great aspirations, etc., and you're a counterculture man, and Could you say something about choosing not to do things?
Probably the worst part of my job, because I'm often offered really good pieces of work that deserve a voice, and I just turn them down. I can tell straight away there's no chance that I can cover the costs and stuff. And I find that excruciating, especially if people have laboured for years to produce something or really believe in it. I can tell straight away that this is not going to fly, because I'm no use to anyone if I go out of business. And I know plenty of publishers who have gone out of business because they publish stuff because they really like it, but actually it hasn't a chance of actually working. So I'm sort of, being a smartass and using the word dream crusher, but actually I hate it. I do not enjoy it, and I'm often tortured, and torture authors actually. If I get something really good and I sit on it, can I make this work? Can I not? Can I make it work? Can I not? And eventually say no, and I feel really bad about it. I think and one of the worst parts. The other thing I feel really bad about is I passionately believe in trying to treat authors with respect, and I regularly don't. I get flooded with requests to publish, and I've only got so many hours in the day. I mean, I'm really busy, and often I don't get round to making a decision quickly or whatever, and I hate that. But I feel quite a bit of regret about that actually. But yeah, so it's actually tremendously hard, because people pour everything into something, and they may have an utterly deluded idea about what the market is, but it doesn't mean to say it's not not a nice piece of writing or whatever. So I find that actually personally really challenging. I don't have a very thick hide. That is another way of saying it. Yeah.
Probably got time for one more. Tricky choice.
You mentioned about doing the Southern Alps and finding more of yourself, to find more of yourself. What were two things that you found for yourself that you didn't know about beforehand? In yourself.
I think I had. I showed that I actually had a hell of a lot more stamina and grit than I thought. To be honest, I actually, discovered I could carry on when I didn't think that I really could do that. So that was a really gave me a lot of confidence to know that actually you can. I did a tramp just last year where we got. Because we were all old people, we got really slow, and we were still going in the pouring southwestern rain in the scrub at, after 18 and a half hours on the go. And I'm quite relaxed. I know I could walk all night if I had to. That was a really fantastic thing. I suppose at a more thoughtful level, I mentioned the word stillness. I think the kind of... with stillness comes a sense of presence and a sense of awareness and a sense of actually looking and stopping down and looking and slowing. And I think that's actually an essential part of a good life. And so that was a real awakening, I suppose, for me, that I thought that was actually something you need to actively work on in your life. And I do in other ways now, but that was a nice sort of part of that whole slowing down. Sadly, I went and then had a career and worked my ass off and worked too hard, and that all went out. But anyway, it was a really fantastic part of that. Mm.
Look, we have run out of time, but Robbie will be outside signing books after the session. So if you have any more questions, I'm sure you can buttonhole him there. Look, that's been a fantastic session. Thank you, Robbie. And I think probably this being a book festival, I can say on behalf of everybody here as well, thank you for your contribution to publishing in New Zealand, because, there are so many books I think that we wouldn't have had if, Putnam Burton had not existed. So, please join me in thanking Robbie.
Thank you very much.
That was another great conversation from the 2023 Marlborough Book Festival. For more information about the event, head to marlboroughbookfest.co.nz. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes soon.